Hello guys, welcome to the new session. And in the last session, what we actually did is we learned how to actually bind the payload that is coming into our application and extract the data that has come in. So to just test run, if we hit the endpoint again, we can see that we are getting the code with c@gmail.com. And I said what we will be introducing in this particular session is how to actually validate our request body. How do we actually validate our request, and how do we actually send a nice response to users, right? So the first thing that I'm going to do for this session is I am going to go to the Go playground, Go Validator. I'm going to go to the Go Validator and have it installed in our application. So once you come here, you copy this and we can go to our terminal. You install the application. So as you see now, it has been installed in my application. So how do we actually perform validation? So as you can see, what is expected of us is to pass in the struct that we want to validate. Then some couple of validation errors will be returned to us. So I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to paste this. But before we can actually validate a struct, they have created some samples for us. So we are going to check those samples out. Let's check how do we. So if you are going to validate, you can see that you have to provide the validate struct. So there are different ways or there are different validation technique that have been provided for us. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this validate required and I'm going to come into our code. Now in the register user request that we defined, I'm going to paste this there. I'm also going to paste this here. I'm also going to paste this, and I'm also going to paste this, right? Then let's see how do we validate email address. We basically provide and tell it that it is an email. So a comma and email. So let's go back to our auth handler. Let's import the validates. Let's go back to the validator. So we are told to import this guy. So I'm just going to import validator package into here. Okay, it's already imported. Validator package is already imported. So validate struct. So how do I get the validate struct? Validate struct. Okay, let's see. Let me see how it is done. Okay, so they created a validator. So the first thing is we have to create a validator like so. So validator is validate struct. Something is wrong. Okay, this is how we define a validate. We need to first of all define this. So yeah, so we are in business now. So you create the validation instance, then you import the validate instance to a pointer, then you create a new validator which requires struct enabled. Then you validate a struct by passing in the structs, and the struct we want to pass in is this payload, right? Now that we have passed it in, the next thing for us to validate a struct is passing the user validate struct. validate structs. So these are the validation errors, right? So let's log the validation errors. C dot logout dot print validation errors. So let's see what that gives us. Let's restart our application. It's getting any response. Look, let me just use fmc dot print line. Let's restart our application. Or you can see now we are getting a key register user email dot error field validation for email field on email tag. So this is the error that we are actually getting. So this is basically trying to tell us that the email field actually failed validation on the email tag. But this is not actually a nice error. Let me just do this. Let me return the error dot error. Let's see. Let me refresh, reload our application as return. So you can see registration. This is the error that we are getting. But this is not a nice error to actually send to the end user. And that is why I have specifically created a different episode to show us how validation actually works. If we go back to the documentation, you will notice that if error is not nil, we have very nice way to actually get different elements in the application. So let me just copy this. I'll come back here, paste this here, right? And so this would be validation errors. So what this one is doing is typecasting, right? It's just basically casting it to type validation errors. So if we come back here, let's reload our application and it's now you will see that we are getting different items. We got the namespace, we got the field. So we are going to use this to actually build an error message that we can send to our clients to let them know they are actually sending in invalid data. So how do we actually go about that? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this method for validation function. Let me just call, let me remove, let me call it validation. And I'm going to create a function here. Function. It of course it will accept the handler and it will be a pointer to the handler. Now the reason why I'm associating it to the handler is because we are going to need this method in several parts of our application. So I'm going to call it validate body requests. So the validate body requests, we actually need to accept two things. It will need to accept the context from echo dot context, and it will also need to accept the payload coming into the application payload, and it will be of type interface because we will have different requests objects type. So now the question we'll probably be asking ourselves now is, how do we actually structure the application? How do we structure our error? The first thing I want to do is I want the error to be of type, or to have some specific fields. So I'm going to create an error type. Let me call it, to be a struct, and I'm going to call it validation error. Sorry, validation error. And our validation error is going to contain the error itself, and it is going to be a string, and we are going to be formatting it as error when we are returning it to the front end. Then we need the key, and we also need the condition. So condition is basically, okay, what condition is actually failing. That's the purpose of the condition here. We will see it, string JSON condition, right? So what our validate body request will be returning will be an array of validation error. That is what it will be returning. Then also, now, how do we start extracting data from? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to define errors, and it is going to be a pointer. Sorry, the pointer has to be here. This is going to be a pointer. Uh, a pointer. And let's go back to our auto handler. We are going to do this validation errors. Come here. So the payload that is passed. So another thing that I need to do is I need to actually define a way for us to have access to this guy. So let me do this here. Let me copy this. Come here. Right? Var facts. And I think I need to copy. So if we come back here, right? So we've defined our validate. We are validating our structs. So the next thing that we'll probably need is, now we need to go through, we need to copy this to, sorry, validation error. Okay, we've copied validation errors. Right, so I could actually copy that and initialize this guy. So that's how we validate our struct. Then we need to extract the validation errors. We need to extract the validation errors. So this one is, sorry, this is just error. Or let me just use R, the regular R. Then to get the validation errors, yeah. Let's see how it is done. Yeah, this is what I needed to check. So get the error. Okay, yes, this is what I wanted to copy. So And then we come here, this in here. So this will actually give us the validation errors, validation errors, right? Now, one thing we must do is when you are performing assertion like this in Echo, you are going to get two items. You are going to get the assertion value, and we call it comma OK. So this OK is just to make sure the assertion is actually correct. So if our assertion is correct, we say if OK, that is what was actually done here. If we look at this place, this time they did not just pick the error, but they are checking if it is okay, then go ahead and print the error. So if it is okay, what we must do now is we need to look through all the validation errors and format them accordingly. So we are going to say for, sorry, for um, for sorry, validation, validation, validation error in the range of validation errors. We are trying to go through this guy. This here is the index, but we don't need the index. So we are basically looping through the validation errors that we have gotten during the process of validating our structs. So um, the first thing I'm going to try to do is to get the field that actually failed validation. That's the first thing I'm going to do. So if you look at here, let's print the field, right? So that will be validation error dot field. Let's see our it is actually expecting something. So let's create a validation. Let's call it current validation error, and the validation error will contain error, error to also contain key, which let's just name it like that, and the condition, uh, just say is required, right? And we are going to append it to the list of errors we created here. Errors, my outside, okay, it should be inside the loop, sorry. It should be inside the loop. Then we want to attach the errors and append it. So we are appending this guy to here now, right? Then I'm going to return the errors. So I'm just doing this so that we can pass our so this, let me put this to a pointer. Just need to pass this in. Then we can return our errors to be a pointer. So let's go back to our application and let's restart our application. So if we hit this now, let's see what happens. Trying to print. Okay. In order to use the we need to be able to use that method. Now the question is, how do we actually use it? All we need to do is validation. Let's get our validation errors, and we are going to say handler, the handler dot validate for the request, and we are just going to pass in the current context, and we are going to pass it the body as well. I mean the payload. So the reason why I'm passing the payload object itself is because what we've initiated here is a pointer, and what this is actually requesting for is not a pointer. So if I come down here, print line validation errors, and let's restart. Okay, we have a spelling error, validation errors, validation errors. Let me just say validation errors. Okay, so let's come back and restart our application. If we come back here now, so as you can see now, okay, you can see, okay, let's go back. That is actually painting, it's printing a pointer. Let me comment this out. Let's go back in here, return errors, alt and how do we set it? That's actually printing. Let's try it again. Let's refresh the application, and it's okay. So we are getting email. Okay, very good. So as I said, if you look at it now, we are getting the field under validation, just like that, right? Based on the email that has been printed to our terminal, which is basically what as field validation. If we remove the first name and try to hit this endpoint, you can see we are seeing the first name and the email address as well. So let me just return this. And even if we remove everything, let's remove everything, right? You can see now in our terminal, we are seeing that first name is failing validation, last name, email, password. All of them are failing validation. So what we are going to do now is we are going to move forward with formatting our error. So what we actually need from all of this is we need the tag, the actual tag. So the tag, let me copy this, paste, paste. The tag is basically what actually failed, what failed. Is it required? Is it email? The actual tag is the JSON field that failed. JSON field. Or let me say field that's failed. So now let's come to our Postman documentation. Let's hit this endpoint. Refresh our application. Let's hit this endpoint. So you can see that. So let me remove first name so that we can see what I'm saying better. Let me have the email correct. Come back here. It's so now you can see that required, I mean, tag, actual tag. So oh sorry, we need to get the sorry, what to get what field. What we need is the field that actually failed. Sorry, field. If I come back here and restart the application and hit, so you can see now we are getting the field that actually filled, which is actually the first name. I'm trying to see, but we need a way to be able to actually retrieve the JSON name that actually filled, or the tag that actually filled. So let me see if we can get that in the struct field. And refresh our application. Let's come back here. It's so that is still giving us. There should be something that will give us. Let me copy this guy again. Paste. I'm not copying it properly. Copy. Paste. Yeah, 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 yeah. So I'm going to restart our application. Hit it again. So none of these guys are actually giving us the JSON field that failed. So what we can do is we can find a way to actually extract the JSON parts, right? So in order to do that, there is a way we can go about that. We can inspect the particular error that is actually failing, or the particular field that is failing. So let me do that. Field error. You don't need to master this, just know it. So reflected um so we need to import the echo reflects. This is basically a nice way for you to be able to actually inspect your application, or to inspect a struct. So in order to be able to inspect a struct, so just before going into the loop, let's say reflected equals to reflects. So what we want to inspect is our payload, or just a value of payload. Now, if we print fmt dot print line reflected dot, so you can see we can actually pick a lot of things from that struct. We can check if it is a boolean. We can check the kind of parameter it is, and so on and so forth. So, but what I'm interested in is the type, and I want to get the field by name. This is where we are going to get reflect the type. I want to get field by name, and the name of the field is basically this guy. To be struct, the struct field name itself. So you just comment this out. So let's try to rerun our application. So if we can see what has been printed, we can see that we are seeing the struct field is first name, is type JSON, and we can see everything that we associated to the struct. So what we are going to do now is we are going to say so this actually returns a string. So let me remove this. Let's see. So we are going to get the field. So this can either go through or it will return an error. So that's why we need to extract the error parts. Since we already defined error here, we don't need to redefine. Okay, which is fine. So now what we are going to do is I'm not going to retrieve this. So what I'm going to do now is now that I have the field, I can then retrieve the JSON part, which is basically the key that we need. I'll define var key. This will be a string, and we say field key. You can see this thing is automatically compiling it for me. And the set of tag that has been defined on the application itself and the tag that we want to extract from. So you can also extract from query parameter or JSON and all. So maybe what I should do is, let me do this. Is this allowed? Uh, so let me see. So this will be string. So although we are only checking for string, we should be able to check if it is JSON or if it is form data or query. But when we get to that bridge, we are going to cross it. So what we are going to do now is if the key is like empty, that is a JSON, this thing is not defined. A JSON tag is not defined on the field we are trying to get a tag. We can just set the key to a lowercase of the struct field. Strings dot lower to lower. That will be validation error dot struct uh, struct field. Let me copy it. Struct field validation error. Struct field. So, but if it is defined, then we are fine, right? So let's okay, let me get the tag as well. Let me get the tag, that is if it is required or this thing. So condition is validation error tag, validation error tag. Then I think we are fine. We are fine. So let's build an error message. Error message will then be validation param. Error message will be no, sorry, that would be the key, um, the key plus. So what I want here is field is the condition, right? So let's say first name field is required, or email field has to be an email, but we are going to get there. That is not how we are going to construct that. Now that we have that, we can now easily replace the error with error message, the key with key, and the condition with condition, right? So um, let's let's test this. So now that our application is actually serving, so we can then go ahead to our auth handler and say we want to send this validation error. So this time around, it won't be string, it has to be JSON. JSON. So we are sending a JSON. So let me refresh the application. Sent. Now you can see first name field is required, the key and the condition required, right? So this way, the front end can easily display the error to the user, or they can use it as some sort of way for them to actually display message to the end user. But the one thing is this cannot be displayed to the end user. We need a very nice formatted. So we need a way to remove this title or this underscore. So how do we go about that? So what we are going to do is we are basically just going to use um we are going to use Django replace. So let me just go it right there. So just before attaching it, we are going to say key to title case. We can then say key strings dot replace um, in the key. Yeah, okay. Key. So what we are replacing is underscore, and we are replacing it with space. And want to replace it all across the whole string. So I'll replace this with title case. I'm going to refresh our application, run dev. So we can see that this key is actually being modified, but that's not what we want to modify. We don't need this here. Key, let me return it. Key. So where we want to use it is right here. Let me just this right there. So let's refresh and hit again. So you can see now first name field is required, right? That's nice. So let me return the first name, and you can see our email is no longer valid. So let's see what happens. So email field is email. That is not actually explanatory well enough to the end user. So what we can do is we can reformat the error message that will be showing for different tags, right? So using switch statements, what we want to check? We want to check the condition. So if the case when the condition is required, right? That is, remember I said, if you look at our condition here, it is email. So if it is required, we want to say, um, we want to say that error message should be equal to key. I want to make use of this. Error message should be equals to key title case plus plus is required, right? Then if it is case is email, right? Want to say error message. Oh my God. So you can see how my ID is making my life really easy. So key must be a valid email address, right? So now let's refresh. So let's hit this again. So you can see now email must be a valid email, right? We can even just put address. If I remove first name and hit, so you can see we are getting our error nicely formatted. First name is required. Email must be a valid email, right? So let me just refresh again so that we can get to that newly formatted email address. So we are getting no. Right? Let me try again. Why are we getting null? Oh, okay. The reason why we are getting null is because all our data is now valid. And that is basically what we are sending in our handler. So now the idea now is if validation error is nil, is not nil, right? We want to send the validation errors data like so, right? Then for this one, we want to actually send a JSON bad request. We are just going to send it as bad request like so. So let's refresh, see again. So let's remove first name and send. First name is required. Email, if we remove email, we are going to get email is required. Nice and simple like that. Then if we pass in an invalid email address, you are getting email must be a valid email address, and we are also getting first name is required. So I believe this is actually a very nice way to actually display our validation address or send it to the clients or whoever is consuming our API. So in the next session, where I'm going to be facing now is um how we can actually create custom, because I don't like repeating myself. The way I keep repeating all of this, I believe we can actually adjust things a bit better to make it much more easier for us to use different what's the name different method that we'll have written and we can easily use to send response out to the users.